There is a dog that has chosen a human over every dog it has ever met. This is not a rescued dog with trauma around other dogs. This is a socially healthy, physically capable animal that has full access to canine social interactions and simply prefers the human. When the human leaves the room, the dog follows. When other dogs are present, the dog checks where the human is before engaging with them. When the dog is stressed or uncertain, it does not look to the other dogs for reassurance. It looks to the human. Every person who has lived closely with a dog recognizes this immediately. But here is what most people have never stopped to consider. This behavior is extraordinary. From an evolutionary standpoint, from an ecological standpoint, from the basic logic of social species preferring their own kind, this dog's behavior makes no obvious sense. Dogs are social animals. Other dogs speak their language, share their sensory world, understand their social signals with a precision that no human can match. A dog that consistently chooses human company over canine company is doing something that the baseline evolutionary logic of a social species does not straightforwardly predict, and dogs are not the only animals doing this. Across multiple species, in multiple ecological contexts, with multiple different ancient origins, animals have been observed forming primary social bonds with humans that eclipse their bonds with members of their own species, seeking human proximity over conspecific proximity, treating humans as their primary social reference, organizing their behavior around human presence in ways that go far beyond simple conditioning. The question of why this happens, what it reveals about animal cognition, about human social signals, and about the specific nature of the ancient human relationship with the animal world leads somewhere much more interesting than the simple answer of domestication made them friendly to people. Start with what a primary social bond actually means in behavioral terms, because the concept requires precision to be useful. Social bonds in animals are not just preferences for proximity. They are specific cognitive and neurochemical relationships in which one individual functions as a secure base, a source of reassurance in threatening situations. A primary social referent whose presence or absence meaningfully affects the bonded individual's stress response and behavioral organization. Attachment researchers studying human infants identified the hallmarks of primary attachment. The attached individual seeks proximity to the attachment figure, uses the figure as a secure base for exploration, shows distress when separated, and shows relief and behavioral reorganization when reunited. These are not arbitrary behaviors. They are expressions of a specific neurobiological state in which the attachment figure is encoded as a primary safety signal whose presence downregulates the stress response and whose absence activates it. When researchers applied the same framework to the dog-human relationship, they found that dogs show exactly these attachment behaviors towards their human owners, including the specific pattern in which the human functions as the primary secure base rather than other dogs, strangers, or any other available social entity. The dog that looks to the human when uncertain is doing behaviorally what the infant does when looking to the parent. It is seeking the primary attachment figure who has been encoded as the primary safety signal. This is a neurobiological relationship, not just a behavioral preference. The human has been integrated into the dog's stress regulation system in a way that other dogs typically have not been, producing a functional attachment that operates through the same neurochemical pathways, primarily oxytocin and the associated stress regulation circuits, that intraspecific attachment operates through. The more interesting question is how this happens. What process produces an interspecies attachment bond that displaces or at minimum competes with intraspecific social bonds? And what the ancient context reveals about that process. The critical variable appears to be the early developmental period in which social bonds are most readily formed. All social animals have specific developmental windows during which the nervous system is most plastic with respect to social learning. Periods in which the identity of social partners is most readily encoded, in which the neural templates for primary social bonds are most readily established, and in which the presence of specific individuals during specific experiences most powerfully influences the development of the attachment system. For dogs, this sensitive period for socialization occurs between approximately 3 and 12 weeks of age. Puppies exposed to extensive positive human interaction during this window develop fundamentally different human orientation profiles than puppies without this early exposure, even if both groups subsequently receive identical human contact. The early window shapes the baseline social architecture, the fundamental orientation of the attachment system toward or away from humans, in ways that are not easily modified afterward. For the ancestral wolves that began the domestication process in the ancient world, the equivalent of this window was being exploited every time an ancient human community raised a wolf pup, whether deliberately or as the consequence of the wolf pup's presence in the human community, through whatever circumstances brought it there. The pup whose early developmental experience was organized around human social contact was a pup whose attachment system was being shaped toward human orientation during the period of maximum neural plasticity. The ancient human who picked up an orphaned wolf pup, driven by the infant care impulse we have discussed in other contexts, was not just providing food and protection. They were providing the specific developmental experience during the specific developmental window that could permanently alter the social architecture of that animal's attachment system, producing an adult animal whose primary social bonds were oriented toward humans rather than toward wolves. Here is what makes this more complex and more interesting than simple socialization. The animals that form primary bonds with humans are not just associating humans with positive experiences during sensitive periods. They are actively preferring humans as social partners in ways that suggest something about the specific qualities of human social interaction that make it attractive relative to conspecific interaction for certain types of individuals. Consider the specific social environment that ancient humans provided for the animals that chose human proximity. Ancient humans were among the most socially sophisticated organisms on the planet, producing richer, more varied, more informationally dense social signals than any other species in the landscape. Human social interaction involved facial expressions with extraordinary subtlety, vocalizations encoding emotional information with high complexity, gestural communication, integrating pointing and showing behaviors that no other ape produces spontaneously, and sustained social attention directed at specific individuals with a quality and duration that exceeded what most animal social interactions involved. For a cognitively sophisticated animal capable of reading and responding to these signals, human social interaction was a richer social experience than intraspecific interaction in certain specific dimensions. The range of communicable emotional states, the specificity of human attention, the complexity of human behavioral responses to the animal's own behavior, all of these made human social interaction more informationally rich, more cognitively engaging, and in some respects more rewarding than the social interaction available from conspecifics. This is not claiming that human social interaction is better than conspecific interaction in some absolute sense. Conspecific interaction involves signals perfectly matched to the receiver's sensory and cognitive architecture, which has significant advantages. The point is that for specific animals with specific cognitive capabilities, the cognitive sophistication to process rich social information, human social interaction has specific attractive qualities that can compete with conspecific interaction for social attention and eventually for attachment. Now bring this into the ancient human context with specific force, because the dynamics we are describing were operating in ancient communities in conditions of genuine intimacy and genuine mutual observation that modern human-animal relationships rarely replicate. Ancient humans and the animals that chose their proximity were not interacting across managed distances. They were sharing the same physical spaces, the same fires, the same shelters, the same daily routines, in conditions of continuous proximity and continuous mutual observation. The animal living in or near an ancient human camp was immersed in human social life for every waking hour, continuously exposed to the full range of human social signals, continuously building a detailed individual-level model of the specific humans in the community. The depth of social knowledge that this immersion produced in cognitively capable animals, the specific knowledge of individual humans' behavioral tendencies, emotional states, social relationships, and daily patterns, was qualitatively different from the superficial familiarity of managed cohabitation. Ancient companion animals knew specific people the way community members know each other, as detailed individuals with specific personalities, specific behaviors, specific emotional patterns, and specific relationships that could be navigated with some sophistication. This depth of individual knowledge is precisely what primary attachment relationships are built on. Attachment to a caregiver is not attachment to a category of individual. It is attachment to a specific individual whose behavioral patterns have been so thoroughly learned that the nervous system has encoded that individual as a primary safety signal. The ancient animal that had spent months in the daily company of specific humans, observing their specific behaviors, learning their specific patterns, was accumulating exactly the kind of individual-specific knowledge that primary attachment formation requires. The specific question of why some animals prefer humans over their own kind, rather than simply tolerating human proximity alongside conspecific relationships, deserves direct address. Several interacting factors appear to contribute to this specific pattern. First, the developmental timing factor already discussed. Animals whose early social experience was heavily weighted toward human interaction will show human-oriented attachment regardless of subsequent conspecific exposure, because the early developmental window shapes the fundamental architecture of the attachment system in ways that persist. Second, the resource and safety association factor. In ancient communities, human proximity was associated with reliable access to food, with protection from predators, with shelter from environmental extremes. These associations created a powerful conditioning framework in which human proximity was encoded as a reliable predictor of positive outcomes. Not just occasionally positive, but reliably, consistently positive in ways that wild conspecific relationships were not. The animal that associated human proximity with reliable resource access and safety was an animal that was being reinforced for human-seeking behavior every day. Third, and this is the factor most rarely discussed, the specific quality of human social attention. Humans direct sustained, individualized, responsive social attention at animals they are bonded with in a way that is unusual among animals. The specific quality of human eye contact, the specific human tendency to track and respond to the animal's behavioral states with individualized behavioral responses, the specific human pattern of vocalizing towards the animal with the prosodic features of infant-directed speech. All of these produced a social environment in which the animal was the object of more sustained, more individualized, more responsively calibrated social attention than it typically received from conspecifics. For cognitively sophisticated animals capable of reading and responding to social attention, being the object of this quality of human attention was a social experience with characteristics not easily matched by conspecific relationships. The human who was paying specific, individualized, sustained, responsive attention to the animal was providing something that the animal's conspecifics were not providing in the same form. Address the specific cases of animals that choose humans over conspecifics in conditions where conspecific access is unrestricted, because these cases make the preference most visible and most theoretically interesting. Dogs in multi-dog households that nevertheless orient primarily to a specific human, seeking that human's proximity over other dogs' proximity, looking to that human for reassurance in uncertain situations, showing the attachment behavioral profile toward the human that they do not show toward the other dogs, are demonstrating that human preference in these individuals is not simply the consequence of insufficient conspecific contact. They have conspecific contact. They prefer the human. Horses that form primary bonds with specific human handlers, seeking those handlers' proximity in pastures where other horses are freely available, showing the secure base effect toward the handler rather than toward other horses, displaying reunion behavior toward the returning handler that exceeds their reunion behavior toward reintroduced herd members. Show the same pattern in a species whose social architecture is fundamentally herd-based and whose evolutionary history involves no selection for human orientation in the same direct form as dogs. Crows and ravens in naturalistic settings that develop primary affiliative relationships with specific humans, seeking those humans' presence, bringing objects to them, showing distress at their absence, are demonstrating the pattern in a species whose cognitive architecture for forming individual-specific social relationships is well developed, and whose specific association with humans in the ancient context was sufficiently sustained to allow the formation of these relationships. The common thread across all of these cases is cognitive sophistication adequate for individual-level social knowledge, combined with developmental or experiential history that weighted human social interaction heavily during periods of maximum social learning plasticity. What does this mean for understanding the ancient human relationship with the animal world? Ancient humans were, for the cognitively sophisticated animals of their landscape, the richest and most rewarding social partners available in specific dimensions. Not because ancient humans were trying to be good social partners to animals, they were pursuing their own survival and social objectives with no particular intention of being attractive to animals. But because the specific qualities of human social interaction, its richness, its individualized responsiveness, its emotional expressiveness, its sustained attention, were qualities that cognitively sophisticated animals were specifically well positioned to respond to. The animals that wound up preferring human company in ancient communities were the animals with sufficient cognitive sophistication to process and respond to rich human social signals, who had developmental histories that oriented their attachment systems toward human social experience, and who were living in conditions of sufficient intimacy with specific humans to develop the individual-level social knowledge that primary attachment formation requires. These were, consistently and predictably, the same animals that became domesticated. that formed the co-evolutionary partnerships with ancient humans that produced the species living alongside modern humans today. The animals that chose ancient human company were the founders of domestic lineages precisely because their choice of human proximity was the behavioral expression of the specific cognitive and social characteristics that domestication subsequently selected for and elaborated. By the way, if you want to go even deeper into the secret lives of ancient humans, I just launched a full course called The Secret Lives of Ancient Humans. 10 modules, 3+ hours of content covering everything we never talk about on YouTube. What they feared, how they communicated, what hunted them, and much more. Plus an exclusive PDF guide included. Link in the description. See you inside. Here is the dimension of this that most discussions of human-animal bonding miss entirely. The ancient human who noticed that a specific animal was choosing their proximity, who observed the specific behavioral profile of an animal orienting to them as a primary social referent, was observing something that their specific social cognitive capabilities made them uniquely positioned to recognize and respond to. Humans are the species on this planet most specifically adapted for reading and responding to social attachment signals. The specific behaviors that express attachment, the proximity seeking, the secure base usage, the distress at separation, the relief at reunion, are behaviors that human social cognition is specifically calibrated to detect and respond to, because these are the behaviors of human infants expressing attachment to caregivers. The human caregiving system is tuned to exactly these signals. When an ancient human observed an animal orienting to them with the specific behavioral profile of primary attachment, coming to them for reassurance, seeking their proximity in uncertain situations, showing distress at their departure, their human social cognition was reading those signals as attachment signals, activating the caregiver response system, and producing the behavioral consequence of deepened engagement with the animal. The animal's choice of the human activated the human's caregiving system. The human's activated caregiving system produced more of the sustained, individualized, responsive social attention that had attracted the animal in the first place. This deepened the animal's attachment, which produced more attachment behavior, which further activated the human's caregiving response. This mutual reinforcement loop, the animal's attachment behavior activating the human's caregiving response, the human's caregiving response deepening the animal's attachment, is the specific mechanism that made the ancient human-animal bond self-perpetuating once it was initiated. Neither party planned this. Neither party was executing a strategy. Both were responding to signals with the behavioral systems they had, and the consequence was a bond that deepened through its own operation. Here is the full picture. The dog that consistently prefers its human owner over every dog it has ever met is not confused about species. It is not failing to recognize the difference between a human and a dog. It has formed a primary attachment bond to a specific individual, one that happens to be human, through a developmental and experiential process that oriented its attachment system toward that specific individual, and it is now behaving in exactly the way that any socially sophisticated animal with a primary attachment bond behaves, organizing its social world around the attachment figure. The same process operated in the ancient world between ancient humans and the specific animals that chose their proximity. The animals that chose ancient human company were animals whose cognitive sophistication, developmental history, and experiential exposure to specific humans had produced exactly the same attachment orientation that the dog in the opening scenario demonstrates. They chose humans over their own kind, not because they were domesticated into preference, but because the specific qualities of the specific humans they were attached to. The richness of human social signals, the individualized responsiveness of human attention, the reliable association of human proximity with safety and resources, made those specific humans genuinely preferable to conspecifics in the specific dimensions that matter most for a primary attachment relationship. The ancient human who found a wolf sitting close to them while the other wolves were across the clearing was witnessing one of the most consequential behavioral moments in evolutionary history. Not because it was dramatic, because it was the specific, individual, neurochemical expression of a bond that would, across thousands of generations of repetition and selection, produce every domestic dog that has ever lived, the wolf chose. That is the part that gets left out of the domestication story. The wolf chose first. The behavioral ecology of cross-species attachment, why cognitively sophisticated animals choose humans over their own kind. How the ancient context shaped this dynamic, and what it produced in the species that share our world today, is one of the most illuminating windows into the specific nature of what ancient human social life actually was, and what it meant for the other intelligent animals that were embedded in it.